Hello, friends. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Michelle Fondin, and I'm the author of Help! I Think My Loved One is an Alcoholic, a survival guide for lovers, family, and friends. I'm also the author of Twin Flame Romance, The Journey to Unconditional Love. All of my books are available in paperback, Kindle, and Audible books. If you're new to my channel, welcome. Thank you for subscribing below. Click on that bell, scroll up to all for all notifications, and thank you for giving the video a thumbs up. I do readings, 30, 60, and 90-minute readings, romance, twin flame, life, path, and purpose. You can book that on my website, michellefondinauthor.com. Through the end of this week, we are running a promotional code, all caps April Fool, for the Twin Flame Boot Camps to get $40 off. The links are below to register. Welcome to Removing Obstacle Thursdays. This is part 2 in the mini series that I'm doing on twin flames and addiction. The topic for today is your twin flame is an addict. Now what? There are 16 tips that I'm going to give you today to help you along if you have discovered or you've known all along that your twin flame suffers from an addiction. Now, in this video, I'm really going to focus more on chemical addiction. When we talk about chemical addiction, we are talking about alcohol, drugs, prescription pills. Those are the type of things that we are speaking about. If your twin flame suffers from any other type of addiction, such as gambling, pornography, food, or shopping, overspending, then try to find the 16 tips and where they might fit into those things as well. Now, the problem with somebody who loves an addict is that we begin when we love this person, and overall, when we love this person unconditionally, as we do with a twin flame, right? Or even as a child. So if your child is in the position where they have become addicted to something, then it's really hard because we love this person unconditionally, as you should. However, loving somebody unconditionally does not mean that you don't have standards and that you don't set boundaries and that you are not looking out for yourself. On the contrary, you need to be looking out for yourself. You need to be protecting yourself. And you need to be putting yourself in first place first after God or your higher power so that you can adequately show up in relationship with others and just show up in general in your life. So the problem is we begin, as someone who loves an addict, we begin to accept the unacceptable. And we begin really to lower our standards day after day after day after day until finally we have let go of our moral values. We've let go of our standards. We begin to have these rock bottom standards, and we just begin accepting things that on a normal basis, on a normal day with a normal person, we would never accept in a million years. And I'm here to tell you that you absolutely, positively do not need to accept the unacceptable. And in fact, it's harmful to you and the people around you to accept what is unacceptable. Let me give you an example. So for example, I always said I would never, ever in a billion years date someone who had been to jail, because that's just a standard that I had set for my life. I don't care what they did. I don't care what the fault was. But if they had ever been to jail for any reason, I wouldn't date them because that's just ridiculous for me, for my own standards. And when I was in a relationship with an alcoholic person, that person had been to jail on the count of drinking and driving, on the count of just different things like belligerent behavior. And it doesn't matter if they spent one night in jail or overnight or 2 nights or whatever. But the fact is, this person had been arrested several times and thrown in jail a handful of times. And so that should have been a red flag to me. But because I loved this person, I had fallen in love with this person. It wasn't until weeks later where I had actually learned this, that I began to accept the unacceptable. And then that is only the very bottom layer of the cake, because it stacked up all the way to the top with many things that I began to accept that were, to me, in my life, were completely unacceptable. So let's start with these 16 tips to help you formulate a way to stop enabling and stop accepting the unacceptable when it comes to your twin flame relationship or any other relationship, but we're focusing on twin flames here. In your twin flame relationship with a twin flame addict, so that you can heal yourself and not fall into these unhealthy patterns. Does that mean that you don't love your twin flame? No, it doesn't mean that, but it does mean that you will have the cognizance to stay away or stay back as long as you need to until that person is ready to get help for themselves, because there's nothing you can do to help that person. In the group called Al-Anon, in the literature, which the literature is great. I'm not super on board with Al-Anon. I think the concept is good. Unfortunately, I feel like a lot of people are stuck. It seems like they don't transform fast enough. And that's one thing that I found, but the literature is great. The 12 steps are excellent. But in the literature, it said the 3 C's. You did not cause it, you cannot control it, and you cannot cure it. Because oftentimes people who love addicts will think that they caused it because there's a big blame game going on here. If only I was prettier, if only I was a better wife, a better husband, a better boyfriend, a better girlfriend, if only this, that, and the other thing, if only I made more money, then they wouldn't drink or use drugs. And so you didn't cause it. There's nothing you could do. In my book, Help, I Think My Loved One is an Alcoholic, I say you could be Prince Charming or a perfect 10 and your alcoholic would still drink. It doesn't matter. You could be the top model on planet Earth and your alcoholic would still choose alcohol over you. So you did not cause it. The second thing is you can't control it. And the plight of the enabler is to try to control it, but you can't control it. And the third is you can't cure it. Addictions cannot be cured. They can't. As I mentioned in the previous video, and I'll put the link above if you have not yet watched the previous video, it is a multifaceted disease. It's not just a physical disease. It's not just a mental disease. It's not just a spiritual disease. It's physical, mental, emotional, psychological, spiritual. It's also a disease of relationship, and it's also societal. So there's so many layers to this that there's nothing you could possibly do to cure it, and there is no cure. You can only learn to shift behavior through things like the 12 steps, through things like AA, NA, Al-Anon, all of these things to help you modify your behavior so that you see things differently and you do things differently and make different choices. But an alcoholic or an addict will always be an alcoholic or an addict. It's just if they go back to that substance, they're going to be back to level 1 again, where it's just going to it's going to start all over again. And usually it starts much worse than when they first started drinking or drugging. So can't cure it, but you can modify your own behaviors with the addict. And in the 3rd video in this series, I'm going to talk about you in particular as someone who does not use, does not drink, does not do drugs, is not an addict. But what is your role in this relationship? So we're going to talk about that in the 3rd video. But in this video, I really want to address these 16 tips. So number 1 is stop covering up unacceptable behavior. What does that mean? It means that you might see unacceptable behavior, but you just turn the other way. You overlook it. And not to mention that, for example, if the addict drank 5 beers that night and passed out, then you would go ahead and clean up after them. For example, you would take those 5 beer bottles, put them in the recycling, clean up everything so it looks perfect the next day. So when you're covering up the behavior, the addict cannot see what they did the night before or how they behaved the night before. The same thing goes is if they were acting super obnoxious and you didn't mention it to them or just didn't say anything or just didn't even address the fact that, hey, when you drink too much, I notice that you start calling me names, and I just want to let you know that that's not acceptable behavior. So if you cover up for them thinking like, oh, they were just drinking, it's no big deal, then that is when you start accepting the unacceptable. Number 2 is a huge one. Do not give money. And so many of you out there, I know this is going on because I've heard it. And I've heard it through not only the twin flame coaching that I do, but I had produced over 40 videos on alcoholism, addiction, and recovery. And I would see it in the comment section. And I had been as well teaching yoga in a rehab center for a year. And just the things that I would hear from family members and friends is just insane. And the thing is that being a good person, yes, I understand that you think that being a good person is giving money as a part of being a good person. But the problem is the addict needs money to continue their addiction. And it doesn't matter if they're just using it for food or rent. The problem is that they're drinking or drugging away the money that they do have. Believe me, I know this. My addict would make a lot of money in one night and then would squander it away. By the end of the night, he basically had nothing because he would go and spend it on drinking or high-end foods or something like that. But he couldn't keep money in his pocket for more than 24 to 48 hours. He just couldn't. And so he was constantly asking people for money or asking to borrow money from others. And if you stop, that's just one less person who is going to enable their addiction. Number 3 is don't nag, plead, or beg. There is nothing you can do to stop it. I just want to let you know that. It doesn't matter what amount of pleading, begging you do or nagging you do. They're not going to modify their behavior if they're not ready. And what ends up happening is it makes you look like the crazy person. And believe me, I was there too. I was the crazy person. I did all of those things. I was a total crazy person. So no amount of nagging, pleading, or begging is going to change your situation. Number 4, don't make excuses for bad behavior. This kind of goes with number 1. It's like it's not covering up the bad behavior, but it's making excuses for the bad behavior. What does that mean? That means if you're out to dinner at a dinner party and your addict starts mouthing off, swearing, or just, being really loud and belligerent and telling stories, making excuses for their behavior might be like, oh, they're having a really rough time at work and they don't like their boss and their boss is really hard on them. And you know the drill, right? It's just covering up, making excuses for them. Oh, they were abused as a child. Oh, their mother didn't treat them right. And it's like, no, I'm sorry. Alcoholism and addiction is a disease. And it's a disease that when you drink to excess, when you drug to excess, it causes certain behavioral patterns that will come to light. And so it's that is causing it. It's not the fact that they were abused. It's not the fact that they have a hard time with their boss. Yes, those might be the core wounds that are coming out as a result, but it's really the substance use that is exacerbating the problem, and it's covering up the fact that they're not dealing with these issues. Number 6, call the disease a name to others. This is going to sound like you're almost like ratting out your person. But here's the thing. Addiction has been under this shroud of shame for so long, and it is such a huge problem in the world. And I gave you the statistics for the United States alone. It is such a humongous problem that if we don't start calling it by its name and that it is a disease, then what it does is that it still keeps that shroud of shame around the addiction. And when you do that, that's when you fall into shame yourself and you fall into denial yourself. And the disease starts lurking in the shadows and it can't come out into the light until you give it a name. And so if you are talking to a family member and they notice that the behaviors that are happening as a result of this addiction, then you can say, so-and-so suffers from alcoholism. So-and-so suffers from drug addiction. I'm doing my part to stop enabling this person, but it's really up to this person to get help when they're ready. Number 7, Don't believe their lies, stories, or excuses. Addicts have a really, really, really good way, and they've honed the skill of lying to try to cover up the drinking or drugging, to use excuses for why they are not showing up in regular life. Oh my God, I would like, if I had a book with 500 pages, it would be filled with all of the excuses that my ex-boyfriend who was an alcoholic gave me throughout the time that we were together. Oh my God, it was like the most creative excuses. I would have never been able to think up all the creative excuses that he thought up, but it was every single solitary excuse under the sun, and just the lies and the cover-ups, and so extremely convincing. And then the colorful stories that he would make up surrounding things that happened to him. And I was just like, how in the world did you get such a creative imagination to create all of these stories? And the thing about an addict is that they spend so much time doing this. They spend so much time covering up their behavior because they're embarrassed. In reality, they're not doing it to hurt you. They're doing it because they're very, very embarrassed. And a lot of them are entrenched in such denial that they do have guilt surrounding their behavior. They do have hard feelings surrounding and shame surrounding their behavior. But they spend so much time trying to convince others that the situation is not what it is when it really is, that they're so expert at trying to lie, cover up, create excuses, and create stories surrounding their addiction. It's insane that really, even though you know that you shouldn't be believing it, you really do fall into the trap of believing it. You always believe it's going to be better the next time. It's going to be different the next time, that they're really going to get sober this time or get clean this time, or they're starting a new exercise program and that's going to cure them. There's so many thousands of excuses that they possibly have, but your job is to not believe it. Your job is to go back to the default, is that they have an addiction until that is addressed. Nothing else in their life can be addressed, because that is the big elephant in the room. And that is the thing that is all pervasive in their entire life. Number 8, do not argue or debate with them once the alcohol use or the drugging has commenced for the day. Oh boy, did I fall prey to this so many times. You cannot win an argument with someone who is drinking or drugging. There's no way. There's no way you can reason with them. There's no way you can argue with them. There's no way you can debate with them. It's futile. So if they start their nastiness through conversation with you, if they try to debate or they're trying to insult you or tell you you did something wrong because they feel so guilty that they can't control the drinking or drugging, that they deflect. They're really good deflectors. So they deflect the energy from themselves onto you. So they're constantly like pointing out your faults, pointing out what you did wrong, pointing out how you could improve your life. So I would say just refrain from all conversations with them once they've started drinking or drugging. Number 9, don't take care of them. Let them live the consequences of their addiction. They need to be able to see the consequences of their addiction when they come to, if they've passed out, or the next day, or when they have that sober moment or clean moment where they realize what they have done. And I know it's really embarrassing. Addiction is a super embarrassing disease, and because it's very behavioral, and again, it affects relationships in society. So the thing is that when they're in society and there's all this stuff going on, and a lot of times they will have blackouts and they won't realize what they did or said, or even like the consequences of what happened as a result of their use. They need to be able to see that the next day. They need to be able to see it firsthand for real. What does this mean? It means you don't undress them and put them to bed. If they vomit all over themselves, you leave them sleeping in their vomit. Like, they need to be able to see it, because what often happens, because so many of them black out, is that you will tell them this the next day and they won't believe you. They will flat out deny it. They will not believe you. So if they fell asleep in their car, let's say you guys went out and they fell asleep in the car on the way home, let them sleep in the car the rest of the night. Let them wake up in the morning where they are at because they passed out. So it's just, I know it sounds harsh, but believe me, it is the only way. Seeing the consequences of their actions is the only way that they're going to start to realize what's going on. Number 10, treat them with respect at all times. They are a human being. The one pitfall I have seen loved ones of alcoholics and drug addicts fall into is treating them with a total disrespect. Now, I understand that the addict treats you with disrespect when they are using or imbibing in alcohol or drugs or pills or whatever, but you need to keep on the up and up, and you need to treat them with respect at all times. And if that means that in order to treat them with respect, then you need to walk away and not talk to them for days, weeks, or months or whatever, then so be it. But they will remember, believe me, they will remember the people that treated them with respect and the people that treated them with disrespect. And it will mean a lot more to them when they really see that indeed you were a person in their lives who, during their darkest moments, that you were the one that treated them with respect. Number 11, do not take their behavior personally at all. Don't take it personally. It is a disease. Addiction is a disease. It is classified as a disease. They cannot be responsible for their behavior once they are drinking or drugging. There is no way they can be responsible because of all the neurochemistry in the brain that is changed as a result of the alcohol or drugs. So since they can be responsible for that first drink or that first drug of the day. But after that, once that has started, they can't be responsible, meaning for what they say to you, what they do to you. I don't know, in a court of law, that might be debatable. But you want to not take their behavior personally because it's really not them. It's somebody else. It's like the little devil that comes out of the shadows once they start drinking or drugging. Number 12, this is super important. And I want you guys to underline this, to write it out, to underline it again. Never, ever, ever accept physical or emotional abuse from an addict. Ever, never, ever, never. Walk away. Take small children by the hand. No, take, if you have children together with your twin flame, if you have minors or pets in the house, take them and leave. I don't care if you have to stay in a shelter or a hotel or a relative's house or a friend's house. Never accept physical or emotional abuse from your addict, ever. It's unacceptable. Number 13, do set boundaries and follow through on them. Set healthy boundaries. Learn how to set healthy boundaries and then follow through every single time. The problem with addiction is that the addict will always be looking for loopholes all the time. All the time. They will be looking for loopholes and inconsistencies in behaviors. And the more reliable you are, the more consistent you are, and the more self-respect that you have, the more they will respect you. And also what that translates to them is that they have to start to see themselves again. Because the thing with the deflection is that when they infringe upon your boundaries, any boundary, what they're trying to do is make you responsible for their own behavior. That's what they're constantly trying to do. And what they need to do is that when you set that wall, when you set that boundary and you say, no, 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 this is not acceptable, they're faced with their own stuff now. Because the reason why they insult you, for example, when they start drinking or drugging is because they have such low self-esteem. They have so much shame and so much blame toward themselves that it is overflowing. Like the inside of them is overflowing with this shame and guilt that they have to spew it out towards somebody. And if you're the target, you're the target. But if you put up that boundary and walk away and say, like, insults are never okay. And if you insult me, I will depart. I will leave. I will physically leave the environment and I will not be back until you can learn acceptable behavior. If you do that, then they have to face themselves. Number 14, never join the alcohol or drug party It reinforces their own toxic behavior. Now, this one is fuzzy, right, guys? Because I know a lot of you might socially drink and you're like, well, if I socially drink or if I socially smoke weed, then it shouldn't be a problem, right? That can be a slippery slope, especially if your twin flame is an alcoholic or drug addict. It can be a slippery slope because you will always revert to behavior that is lower in energy if you're with someone who has lower behavioral standards. It is very rare that the person with a much higher standards will bring that person with lower standards up to their level. Extremely rare. We're talking like 0.25% out of 100, maybe if that. 99.9% of the time, the person with the higher standards will lower their standards to meet with the person who has the lower standards. So what you might notice is that in order to feel closer to your person who is an addict, you will start to imitate the behaviors that they have so that you can kind of join the party and feel closer to them. It's never going to be the reverse where you're just like, oh, I'm sipping on some club soda and I'm going to go to church tonight and my twin flame addict is going to join me. That's like never going to happen. They're going to be like, bye, see ya, I'm going to the bar. I would say if you do have the occasional drink, that's fine. Try not to do it in front of your addict. It's just like I said, it's kind of like that reinforcing that behavior and telling them it's actually okay when clearly for them, it's just not okay. Number 15, do not buy them alcohol or drugs, not ever, even if they threaten to leave you. Oh my God. In the beginning of my relationship with the alcoholic person that I was dating years ago, I fell into that trap because I didn't really understand addiction and I didn't know what was going on. So it was like in the early stages of the relationship where he would be like, hey, let's go to this concert and will you buy me this, this, and this, and this? As far as alcohol goes, we can pregame it before we go to the concert. And in the beginning I did, but then what happened was as he was getting drunker and drunker, he would just demand more alcohol. And I was getting really confused because I was like, oh, this is really weird. Like I've never been with a person who does this. And the problem is that they're very manipulative in order to satisfy the addiction. So remember, it's kind of like the addiction talking at this point. It's not your person talking, it's the addiction talking. So a lot of times they will con you or guilt you into buying them booze or buying them drugs. And what you need to do is stand strong and say, like, that's not my responsibility. Like, I see that this is hurting you. I see that this is a problem for you. And I don't want to be a part of that. So it's okay to say no. And in fact, I would urge you to say no because that is hardcore enabling behavior is when you are enabling their addiction. And number 16 is get help yourself. We're going to talk more about this in video 3 in the series next week. But as I mentioned, addiction is a relationship disease. It takes two to tango. Addicts cannot feed their addiction in isolation. It's just not possible, especially with chemical addiction. And we've seen this with food addiction too. There are shows out there like, you know, My 600-Pound Mother or something like that. I don't know. There are shows out there. So I know food addictions, when it gets really up there, of course, it takes enablers to keep that addiction going. But for the most part, the more common addictions of alcoholism and drug abuse, is that it takes roughly 6 to 8 people surrounding them in their lives to keep the addiction alive. What is that? It's that all these people become enablers or are enablers and become their enabler in order to keep the addiction alive. Because the addiction is progressive and chronic, the addiction does get worse over time. And so as the addiction gets worse over time, it requires more and more enablers to be able to sustain the addiction. Now, the one question I do get, and I'm gonna close it here because I think I've given you guys a lot to think about. The one thing that I really want to emphasize here is that a lot of people will comment, well, what if I do all these things and then my twin flame addict feels that I'm abandoning them, and then they go and find somebody else in like as a love relationship, as a romantic partnership to enable them? And my answer to you is that they usually do. Okay, so don't be surprised. An addict, if you cut them off, if you stop enabling, if you set those hard boundaries and you follow through, they usually will, not all will, but most will find another romantic partner, another person who is okay with their addiction. Because remember, they're not in their right mind. They're absolutely positively not in their right mind. The addiction has hijacked their brain. And if you're not certain of this, please get my book, Help, I Think My Loved One is an Alcoholic. I really talk in detail about this. But the alcohol or drugs hijack their brain, literally hijack their brain and kind of take over the command, take over the controls. And so because their brain has been hijacked by the drugs or alcohol, yeah, they're going to make choices that are going to only cater to that addiction. And in fact, in advanced stages of the addiction, especially chemical addiction, that's what we're talking about, in advanced stages of the chemical addiction, an addict will choose the alcohol or drug before food or water. So they will stop eating, they will stop drinking water because the only thing that matters for their own survival, according to what they feel, is the alcohol or drug, or both in a lot of cases. So that just shows you how much the brain is actually hijacked in addiction. So I hope this was helpful for you. Please do follow through with those, especially if your twin flame is an addict. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for subscribing to my channel below. Click on that bell, scroll up to all for all notifications. And thank you for giving the video a thumbs up. Thank you for sharing this video with other twin flames. And thank you so much for your support of my YouTube channel. You can buy a book or 2 or 3. You can pledge your support on Patreon, www.patreon.com/Michelle S. Fondin. And I will see you in the next video.